Happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome to the Labor Radio Network's weekly live stream. Really psyched to be here tonight. I'm Bama Athreya. I host a podcast called The Gig, which is about gig workers, and that's the subject of our show tonight. And my co-host is Maximilian Alvarez. Max, you want to say hello?
Hey, how's it going, Bama? Great to be here with you. Excited for the conversation that we got. Big shout out to all of our friends and comrades and cohorts at the Labor Radio Podcast Network. Big shout out to our man Evan Papp from Empathy Media Lab for producing this. And hello to everyone who's watching. So I'm Maximilian Alvarez. I am the host of the podcast Working People, where I interview workers about their lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles. And for my day job, I'm the editor-in-chief at the Real News Network here in Baltimore.
All right, so good to be together tonight, and we are psyched about our guests as well. So we're going to jump right into it. Our first guest is Yaseen Aslam, and Yaseen is joining us from London, UK, where he is up very late tonight to be part of this show. So we super appreciate it. And I want to just give a little background before we jump into asking you some questions, Yaseen. You are with the App Drivers and Couriers Union in the UK, which is actually a fairly new union, but you've been organizing for a while. And you are famous, or in some quarters infamous, because you're the little guy that took on one of the biggest platform companies in the world, Uber, and decided to sue them because you didn't think they were treating you right. So after many years, congratulations. You and your co-plaintiffs just had a really exciting victory in the UK Supreme Court. And so, we're really glad you're with us, and you've got quite a story, so we want to just jump right into it.
Yeah, so a big second, Bama's congratulations on a very hard-fought battle, my man. That was, 6 years altogether?
7 years, I would say 7 years, but I played a small role in it because don't forget we had a lot of people in the process that supported us, including the lawyers, the drivers, and so it wasn't like it was done collectively. So I wasn't able to do it on my own, even though it's my name at the top and I was one of the first claimants. But main thing is we managed to do it.
Well, I think that's part of your story, Yaseen, is like the power of having that union behind you that you were organizing the whole time. But take us back to the beginning, because not everybody knows about the case. Just what happened? Why did you decide to sue this giant company?
Well, I actually started working as a minicab driver, they call it in London. So in London, we have it's regulated. So you have licensed taxi drivers and you have the licensed private hire drivers. So I become a private hire driver back in 2006, when I was made redundant from my IT job, just while I was looking for a job. So it's just like a temporary thing for me. But I got stuck into it because I enjoyed, it was like you work hard on a Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, and you had the weekdays off. And I just was so, basically I got stuck to it. So Uber come into London 2012. But when they first arrived in London, it is more about doing the high-end executive, like the S-Class Mercedes and that kind of stuff. So when they launched the Uber X in 2013, I was one of the first drivers to actually be there on the first day when they launched, So it was good when they first started, and one of the things that we saw over the years, like when you look at the traditional cab office, because you had a human controller, and the way things work, it was like, there's a favoritism system that people didn't like. So, for example, you had a human giving you jobs. So, for example, let's say I didn't get on with the controller, he would make sure I have a crap day. At the same time, you had some controller that would ask you to buy cigarettes for them or doner kebab. So if you didn't look after them, it meant like you were at their mercy. So when Uber come into the market, it's all about you're in charge. You're the boss. You don't need to tell anyone when you're going to log on, when you're going to log off, and all that kind of stuff. But for me, like the biggest, when I really started campaigning, is more about the way drivers were assaulted and attacked in the job, and they had no protection. So if we go back to 2013, people were making decent money. I myself was grossing about £50 an hour, when I was working at Uber back in the day. But it was about, like, let's say I got assaulted by a passenger. Uber would refuse to, cooperate, and basically, like, there was no protection. And then at the same time, we had like a rating system, like where the customer rates you. So even though Uber says you're your own boss and you're running your own business, indirectly, there was something there that was managing you. You're being like performance managed. And at the same time, there's a control element over you where, for example, if my rating dropped below 4.4, I get kicked off the platform. And we couldn't challenge that. So I've seen a lot of my friend drivers that were getting kicked off the platform unfairly, and then at the same time, especially when some of my colleague or friend got assaulted and the customer then rated them badly, like the question was, like, what protection do we have? Where the good thing about traditional cab office was, if you ever got into any problems, you radio in and they'll, like, if there's any drivers parked by nearby, they'll come and assist you. Now, the whole idea of technology is to make you feel safer and better. And one of the things that Uber done very well was isolate everyone. So everyone was just attached. It's all about you being your own boss, making money. But really what was happening is, like when you really look at this model, it's all about, like Uber, they tapped into a market which heavily is the BME community. And because there's so much discrimination, all kind of stuff, people just find it a lot easier. Like the way I went in from IT into cabin, they find it a lot easier to just drive as a living, as an income, rather than going for other jobs or stuff. So what was happening is, there's Uber coming into the market. They came in so aggressively, like when I started, and I'm talking like over the 4 or 5 years, is the fares went down so much. I saw the fares drop 3 times. I saw the commission go up. So at the moment, Uber has about 60,000 drivers in London. But when I started working with them, they only had about 1,000 drivers. So you could see how it went up. So you could see how the model is there. It's all about making the fares cheaper to get more and more customers on the platform, and having more and more drivers on the platform, so they got supplies of drivers. So you got drivers sitting around empty. And the problem we had in, like, for me, like as an old driver, is we could see what was happening because they were killing off the market around us. And if you got kicked out from Uber, you technically have to leave the trade. So my case was more about trying to help drivers with, when they were getting assaulted. So when I filed my case back in 2015, it was about like when, like I was enrolled in a whistleblowing stuff. So in order to be protected under the Whistleblowing Act, you had to be a worker. And at the same time, I met James Barra, who got assaulted by a passenger, and it took 10 weeks for Uber to release that information to the police. So, like we were working together at the time. So when we spoke to the solicitors or the lawyers, they turned around and said, look, you definitely have a case here and this needs to be challenged. And that's where the case started from.
So just to get clear again for our listeners who aren't familiar with the case. So really just even to be able to get records for a driver who was assaulted, it turned out that you needed the company to recognize that you were employees. Is that right?
Well, the point was the contract was made in such a way where if something went wrong, they would disappear. So they basically, you're running your business. If I got killed or something, it's my business. I was running my business and something happened. So there's no one taking responsibility. Now, the big difference between us guys here in London or the UK compared to other countries, like let's say in the USA, is like in California, it's a bit different. But when we're talking about here in the UK, we have a regulator, a license regime, Transport for London. Now, one of the problems we had is the regulators are also failing to do their job, enforcing the law. And then you've got big, massive company like Uber that comes into the market and they could afford not to obey the law. And the problem we were finding is no one is willing to challenge it. So even now that we won in the Supreme Court, one of the problem we have is like whether it's politician, whether it's the government or the Transport for London, they just don't want to fight Uber, which meant the workers have to do the fighting. And that's what it was throughout each process. We kept them being like everyone we went to, like all the politicians, like, even though we had a lot of politicians support us from the Labour Party. But at the same time, it's about, look, we got to wait for the court. We let you guys fight on the court. And I think that's so wrong because it shouldn't be the workers fighting. You know, the regulation is there. For example, the national minimum wage has been around for years. Now, the whole idea of having these basic rights. So in the UK, we have three status. So you have the self-employed, then you have an employee, and then in the middle, we have a limby worker, they call it. Now, with a limby worker, you're only entitled to two basic stuff, which is the right to earn the minimum wage and holiday pay. And the third thing is the right not to be discriminated against or whistleblowing act, and that's it, yeah? So it's just like, for example, let's say I am earning the minimum wage. Why would Uber want to fight me? So they dragged this on for 6 years. So
and I want to just, there are a couple things that I'm going to ask you again just to make sure everybody else knows. And for people who want to hear more about the whole case, by the way, my episode 3, Judgment Day of the Gig, has Yaseen and James's whole story. But Yaseen, your case, you won in the lower courts. And I want to really drill down on something you just said. You won in the lower courts. They declared that you were workers in this second category that you just said. That was years ago. But the company never obeyed that lower court ruling. And you're saying the regulators never stepped in to say you have to obey that ruling.
No
so
one.
You have to keep on fighting and so tell us about what you had to do to sort of keep the pressure.
I mean, this is it. This is what I meant. There's a company that got a fortune to burn. And it's all about, like I said, they rely on these workers that won't fight back. It's all about you getting burnt out, you giving up and walking away. So if you look at the 6 years and even the damages I get for the remedy or whatever you want to call it, it's not even worth it. But the point was someone had to do it. And they were, I think, generally speaking, they underestimated us, thinking we will just walk away eventually. But when the court looked at it, the original tribunal, they didn't want to look at the contract. They wanted to look at the reality of what was happening behind the scenes. And what our case and the reason why everyone talks about it is it just shows that it doesn't matter how good your contracts are, the courts are willing to look at the reality of what's happening behind the scenes. And that's what these companies bank on, the fact that they could set up these contracts to deny people their rights and they could get away with it. But the court made it clear that, look, we won't. So in our case, we had a whole week trial where, the judge looked at everything and he didn't just suddenly come out and give a verdict. It come after 3 months, and that's when we were workers. So it's clarified. But Uber then decided to appeal. So we went to the appeal tribunal. Again, we won there. They then appealed in the High Court. Again, we won in the High Court, and then they decided to go to Supreme Court. Now, the shocking bit is when we first won in the tribunal, when we first won in the tribunal in 2016, immediately the same day, Uber sent out an email to all the drivers saying the ruling only applies to 2 drivers. Okay. But this time when we won at the Supreme Court, they done the same thing, but this time they said the ruling applies to the 25 claimants. So clearly they still want to fight, they want to deny people. And a lot of it's to do with scaremongering because people need a job. They don't want to put a claim. So what's happening now is the new batch of claimants or the drivers that haven't claimed have to file a claim again to, get what they're entitled to.
Well, and then tell us about the organizing, because the whole time you've also been organizing this new app drivers and couriers union. So talk a little bit about that.
So like I said, the organizing was more personal because it was more about when I was seeing people getting assaulted. I just didn't like the fact that, it was wrong. And like I said, at the same time, I saw what Uber was doing because I was talking to drivers from different places, especially around San Francisco. At that time, in 2013. When they first started protesting there. So I could see what was happening there is going to happen here. And then I started talking to some drivers in California, around LA. And then you could see like the issue was it wasn't just unique to London. And even now, as I go on, yeah, we're seeing more and more, it's exactly the same model everywhere. So I started organizing, I set up my small association in 2014. We then went through various stages. Last year, we set up our own dedicated union in the UK. So we're the first union ever to represent gig workers, yeah, app drivers and couriers union. So that was our massive achievement. And one of the things that was banking on this Supreme Court ruling is if we lost, we would have lost our right to be a trade union. But having said that, and just to cut a long story short, everyone used to talk about you can't organize Uber drivers. And since we won in the Supreme Court, we're getting phone calls after phone calls. How do I join the union? So people see the power. And one of the things behind that was us guys and the team behind me and the drivers, whether James Farrow, all of us across the UK, we just been persistent, and we managed to achieve something that, like where now everyone's saying you must be part of this union because this is the union that will help you.
Great.
Well, and I mean, first of all, again, huge congrats to you, Yaseen. Huge congrats to all the workers there, everyone who was involved in that effort. It's a really incredible story and a really inspiring one, especially for us across the pond over here. But, I think a lot of this is going to kind of connect to our next discussion with Willy Solis, who you can see on the call here. I would love for you guys to connect because your story and Willy's are kind of similar in a lot of interesting ways. But, I wanted to kind of highlight one thing and kind of by way of asking you this question before we let you go, because it seemed like there were two big aspects to this Supreme Court ruling that, like you said, like these gig companies, they try really hard to write our rights out of existence with very kind of clever legalese, right? And it's really great to see that the judge in the Supreme Court looked past that to see the reality that was right in front of our faces, right? And so it seemed like there were two big realities that the Supreme Court kind of wrote in stone, which is one, the relationship between Uber and its drivers is one of employer and employee, right? So the drivers are workers. The Uber controls the rates, Uber controls the times, Uber can kick you off the app. And so that was the ruling, if I'm understanding it correctly. But it also, and this is what I wanted to ask you about, it also cut through the bullshit argument of Uber and Lyft when they say that they're not a transportation company, they're a technology company, right? Could you talk a little bit about what that part of the ruling means?
I mean, I'm glad you said that because that's how it was always about. And even the Supreme Court, well, the lower court also said the same thing. And so did the Supreme Court. It's all about, look, the end reality is the driver's going to work longer and longer. So what they're doing is being denied their rights. Now, we see this again and again where companies like Uber are hiding behind technology. And one of our biggest fear as a union is, if you look at our union, like our rule book, it's more about organizing in terms of data, making sure that's part of the collective effort or bargaining when we're involved. Because what we're seeing is these companies are hiding behind this technology and the way they program the system. So we're seeing more and more drivers getting deactivated from the platform because they're rejecting jobs. But when they get deactivated, they're being told that they committed some kind of fraud or fraudulent activities. But when you actually look at that data, it shows that it's they were canceling jobs. So the point behind it is, even though we won at Supreme Court, we still have a lot to do because these companies, they'll just hide behind this technology. And the point is the law should still apply. And that's Uber's argument. They're saying the law should not apply to us because we're a technology company. So technically what they're saying to me is, because it's an app, I should be exploited or I should not have any rights, which, like the laws have been around for years and years. And even the Supreme Court said, yes, it's the same laws, nothing changes. So it's how you spin it. But like I said, we're going to see more and more of this. Like I said, it's very important for that data element because it's just so easy for companies like Uber to just tweak the system or program it in a certain way to get away from that liability. So we still need that transparency. We still need to be able to, access our data, and we need to know, we need to know if basically, really, like my point from day one always been about the law being enforced. I'm not saying we need new laws. We have existing laws, but the problem we have is someone somewhere is failing to enforce their laws, and it means companies like Uber could come in and not obey the law because they could afford not to. So average, like a normal small company or cab office would never be able to fight it all the way to the Supreme Court. So yeah.
I'm seeing Willy nodding a lot at what you're saying, so I can't wait to hear what he has to say about it.
Well, that's what I was
Yaseen,
going to say. Was like, could we just bring Willy in before
I
we
think
let
we just
Yaseen
should.
go?
But I do want to say, Yaseen, you've stayed up super late. I think it's midnight there to be with us. So if you need to go, we understand, and thank you very much for being part of our show tonight.
I mean, I'm happy to stay a little bit longer. It'd be good to hear Willy, because I haven't, and it's nice to meet you guys today. So I'm late anyway. So
Okay, welcome. Let's get into it then.
Yeah, Willy, let's bring you in here because we saw you nodding, and I know a lot of the things that Yaseen was talking about resonate with you and your own story. So I guess just by way of introducing you to our viewers, if you guys don't know who Willy Solis is, you should. He's amazing. Willy is a Shipt shopper from Dallas, Texas. And Shipt, as you all know, is the delivery service for Target, the mega store chain Target, which relies on gig workers like Willy. Willy has a background in construction and has years of experience running his own business. And Willy began working for Shipt in 2019 and has been deeply involved in gig worker organizing over the last 2 years. And he's actually the lead organizer for Shipt shoppers with the Gig Workers Collective. Shout out to the Gig Workers Collective and Vanessa Bain and everyone there. All right, Willy, let's get you in here. What are your thoughts on what you were hearing from Yaseen?
Wow. That's the first reaction is everything that he is saying is resonating completely with me. Your story, Yaseen, is exactly our story. And it just translates so well to the fight that we have here in the United States as well. Much of the things that you were talking about in regards to the levels of control, exercise of that control, the spin that is being given, and the way that these gig companies are portraying the message overall, it's just astounding how they think that on its face they can get away with such lies. At the end of the day. Shipt operates in much the same way that Uber does. I've actually worked for Uber Eats and various other gig apps, and I can tell you that the way that they operate is very, very similar. And to hear your story from across the pond, it resonates completely, and it gives hope for us on this side of things to advance the conversation here.
Well, you know what really struck me, Willy, not to put words in your mouth, but I remember you and I kind of had a recent discussion, which I guess I can't talk too much about because it's supposed to be an interview for a book. So I gotta encourage people to buy the book, but I did a great interview with Willy. But one thing that also struck me was when Yaseen was talking about how before he started working for Uber, right, you have a taxi dispatch. You have a human being on the other side of the phone, right? And I remember when you were talking about what kind of prompted you to eventually get into organizing, because you kept running into the same problems. One of those problems had to do with like how hard it was to get a hold of someone at Shipt when like your card wasn't working at a grocery store. Could you talk a little bit about that kind of the struggle of finding someone who could help you at Shipt and how that actually hurts you as a worker?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Yaseen was saying, everything is great and everything belongs to Uber, everything belongs to Shipt, as everything is, working the way it's supposed to. But the moment something happens that is out of line or just doesn't fit what you're supposed to be doing when it's supposed to happen, or if it's a tragedy, an accident or whatever, you're on your own. And they absolutely 100% just leave you out there hanging. And they reprimand you for it when you get into situations. I was actually deactivated back in 2019 temporarily because I was running late. And that running late was because I was actually trying to get orders processed. Instead of trying to cancel the order or not fulfilling the order for whatever reason, I was trying to do everything that I could. So if you can imagine having a grocery cart full of groceries, trying to go through the line and your card is not working. And if you can imagine that on a personal basis, imagine trying to call ship where you're having to wait 2 hours or longer to get a hold of somebody during a like a holiday season. And that's when I was deactivated, was during Thanksgiving season. And it's a problem. It's a problem overall. And they put it on our shoulders. They put it on our backs, and they say it's your fault. Your Uber's rating of 4.4 is actually very generous. I was actually jealous hearing that. Ours is at 4.7. So if you don't meet 4.7, guess what? You're going to lose your job. And a lot of that times that's very, very unfair, because a lot of these situations have nothing to do with what your level of service is. It has everything to do with the things that are stacked up against you on a daily basis, whether it be in the store, processing issue, a number of things that are outside of your control. But guess what? It's your fault, and you need to pay for it.
So I guess we're going to take a break in a second, and then we'll let Yaseen go to sleep. But Yaseen, I was curious, did you have any kind of questions for Willy, or Willy vice versa?
To be honest, I don't really. I fully understand what he says without him even saying anything, because I heard it so many times. And as ADCU, we also represent couriers, fast food delivery like Deliveroo, Uber Eat, and it's the same problem everywhere. And on top, I'm also on the steering committee on the International Alliance, so I talk to drivers around the world. And it's the same problem, it's nothing unique. But the question is, how do we globally deal with this? And that's what we're trying to do as the International Alliance. But one thing I want to add before I go is, we talked about the Limb B worker status, the middle status that we have in the UK. But this was something that we filed back in 2015. But looking at Uber's model today, I think our drivers, or drivers working on Uber at the moment in the UK, are better off being an employee, because it gives them more protection, like pension, sick pay, when they get dismissed from the platform unfairly, so they have a right to challenge that. So we don't get all that as a Limb B worker. So it's so easy, and I see this in the AB5 and all this stuff, the Prop 22, where Uber's trying to spin a middle category. But the point is, it's either we're independent contractors or we're an employee, where we should have all these rights, because it's technically a full-time job. No? That's it for me.
Hell yeah. Well, Yaseen, again, like Bama said, we cannot thank you enough for staying up late and joining us. Seeing you and Willy on the same stream has really made my day. And yeah, congrats again to you and everyone across the pond on this huge victory.
Thank you.
All right. So I think we're going to come back to our boy Willy Solis in just a minute. But right now, Evan's got a little musical interlude to give us a little chance to stand up and stretch our legs. back? We
We are
back?
back live.
All right. Thanks for that interlude, Evan. That was a great song. So I'll pick this up to kind of continue our chat with gig worker and organizer Willy Solis. Then I'll toss things over to my great co-host Bama to welcome our final and really exciting guest, Maria Figueroa. So Willy, while we have a couple more minutes with you, you know, there's so many things I want to ask, connecting what Yaseen said to what I know you're deeply invested in, but I wanted to make sure that we had at least a couple minutes to talk about where Prop 22 and fits into all of this, right? Because Yaseen was talking about how, you know, from their side in the UK, a big part of the problem, in fact, the biggest part of the problem, is not that the laws are bad, but that they're not being enforced, or that companies like Uber and Lyft are being allowed to, you know, worm their way around them in order to exploit workers for profit. Prop 22 is a little different, though. Prop 22 is these companies really trying to change the law itself. So I guess for viewers who are unfamiliar, could you talk a bit about, you know, not to put you on the spot, but what's your kind of like elevator description of what Prop 22 is and how it fits into this discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about 22. It's a very important topic. The basic function of 22 is that it's an exemption to law, AB 5. AB 5 was passed because of court cases, the Dynamex case in particular. It was codifying the Dynamex ruling into law, where AB 5 actually says that gig workers should be classified as employees and not independent contractors. So for a whole year, between January 1st of 2020 to the time that it actually got passed in November, gig workers were actually employees. And as Yaseen was saying, the regulators were not moving fast enough to basically enforce that. And in the meantime, gig companies operated in the same style, same fashion that they have been operating for years, exploiting workers, using algorithmic despotism to basically gain control over workers in a way that we couldn't fight back. In August, the one interesting thing is that in August of 2020, Uber CEO actually said that he was considering or that they were looking at the option of licensing instead of converting gig workers into employees, obviously because the cost of doing so is pretty high, where we as gig workers are bearing a lot of that weight. So when they started losing their cases in August and in September, they really went full force. They opened up the coffers to a war chest of over $200 million to push forth Prop 22 in the general election. And where we were the weakest, they were the strongest. And specifically in San Francisco, where our messaging was really strong, where gig worker messaging was really strong, all the orgs that came together to push there, we were actually able to win over 50% of the vote in favor of gig workers, or no on Prop 22. The unfortunate part is in the rest of the state, because we don't have those coffers, they were able to pass all this misinformation and disinformation campaigns and confuse the voting public that Prop 22 was actually good for workers. And it wasn't, and it clearly wasn't.
Yeah, I cannot emphasize enough for anyone who's just now hearing about Prop 22 or who only heard about it in passing. I cannot stress enough how much money companies like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Postmates dumped into this misinformation campaign to lie to the voting California public about what Prop 22 was, and to basically dupe people into thinking that they were on the side of workers, when really that was very much the opposite. So, Willy, you know, I know that when you and I have talked about this, you know, off the live stream, you know, I'm very pessimistic about what Prop 22 means for the future of work in general and for, you know, quote unquote gig workers right now. You actually kind of gave me a nice dose of cold water that I think kind of, again, links back to what Yaseen was saying, right? Where, you know, Uber kept appealing, excuse me, Uber kept appealing these decisions in the UK, and it kept losing until finally the Supreme Court said, okay, enough of this, Uber's wrong. And you talked about how, you know, in the wake of 22, it seems like, you know, these gig companies may face a similar challenge. And in fact, that's why they went the route that they went in the first place, right? Instead of going the legislative route, they went through the prop route. Could you talk a little bit about the route that they took, what that says to you, and what it means for you about like how we can fight this?
Yeah, absolutely. And just like in the UK, they were on the wrong side of the law, plain and simple, and they weren't able to win in the courts. So what they ended up doing was spent this 200 and something million dollars over the course of a couple of months, to get Prop 22 really going. And once they got it going, they were able to basically lie to not only workers but also the voting public. In doing so, it gave a lot of people in the gig economy and gig organizing like a case of, wow, we just lost, right? They handed us a huge loss. But the reality is that are giving us the tools that we need moving forward to basically address what it is that they actually did or are doing under Prop 22. They're writing our campaigns for us. I talk to workers every single day. And in doing so, I'm hearing conversations with workers like, hey, I'm not getting the 30 cents per mile. Well, let's dive into that. Why are you not getting it? And I mean, it's issue after issue, them controlling the boundaries of where you can go. The level of control has exacerbated. We recognize and realize at this point that they could actually even force us to wear uniforms if they wanted to. And the reality is that they could, and there's no way for a gig worker to stop them, or to say, hey, I'm supposed to be independent. So again, it gives me great hope to know the fact that they're actually so quickly jumping on this, because it spells out how bad Prop 22 was or is, and it basically gives us the tools that we need to be able to show this is their third way of classifying workers. This is what they say is good for workers. How is this any different than being an employee? They're treating us like employees without any of the social safety nets, without any of the proper pay, without any of the proper protections. They're taking all of this away from us, right? And at the end of the day, what they're doing is taking all that extra profit that they're gaining and putting it in their pockets. Just the other day, there was an Uber driver that was actually assaulted while he was in a vehicle. And Uber's response was, hey, we're going to give you like $20 or we're going to give you $40. But once it's hit the news, guess what? They offered him 100 and something bucks, right? How is that going to compensate him for not only the time lost, right, but the dangers that he put himself into, the liabilities that are involved, and just in general, all the precarious nature of our work? It's not. And the only reason he got any compensation was because the media picked it up. Had the media not picked it up, nobody would have heard his story. So at the end of the day, it's putting us in a position where we need to be able to show, right, the media that, hey, Prop 22 was not only bad. I mean, if you Google Prop 22 right now, you're going to find nothing but negative articles. One of the most amazing ones for me is Instacart is lied to you for you to pay the cost of 22, and it's very, very much true. Cost for the consumer is going up. They promised the consumers that their costs would not go up, and they're going up. On our side of things, our pay is actually going down. So, at the end of the day, these Prop 22 passing gives us the ability and the tools that we need on a national level to carry the conversation forward.
So I have like kind of thoughts on how this could connect to kind of larger legal and legislative challenges, perhaps the PRO Act and its provisions for misclassification. But by way of transitioning, Bama, I wanted to see if you wanted to take this up, maybe kind of bridge Willy and our next guest and ask any question.
I do, and Willy, that I have so many more questions for you as well. I do want to properly introduce our next guest, Maria Figueroa, and I'll explain a little bit about who she is, but I do want to come back to this. I think Max, you just put out there the question that's on my mind too, which is about, it's not just about the PRO Act, right? And it's not just about legislation, but it's about like building the power we need to get that passed. But Maria, we're going to bring you into this as well, because you've been looking at these issues nationally and internationally. Maria is with the Cornell Industrial and Labor Relations Schools Worker Institute, and she is also on the board of the Worker Justice Center in New York, and is working very closely with gig workers who are organizing, delivery workers in particular who are organizing in New York City. So she's going to have a lot to say on multiple levels. I mean, but Willy, I mean, let's go back to, let me kind of mix my question with Max's last question. I mean, PROACT, got a lot of support, got a great statement from President Biden. None of that would have happened, but for the fact that over the course of this past year, we've seen actually so much new worker organizing. So can you talk a little bit about what the past year has looked like for organizing?
Oh, wow, it's been amazing. My organization, Gig Workers Collective, is as grassroots as it gets. We don't have the right to organize and actually form a collective bargaining agreement with these gig companies or force them into even considering one. But what we can do is we can definitely bring to light all these issues as best as we can. That's why the PRO Act is really, really important, because we do need that right to organize, and we do need to be properly classified. And with it having the positive steps forward, that's exactly what we need in this country. I'm really hopeful that the Biden administration and Congress can really push this thing through and move forward and actually get results for working people. And at the end of the day, that's who needs the relief. And we, not the gig companies, we need the relief. So organizing in general has been very, very impressive. I've never done organizing myself in my life, so I'm completely new to it. But I can tell you, in the circles that I've been in and that I've met people, it's a collective agreement or collective together of empowerment that's happening. And I mean, everybody's coming together to uplift each other for sure.
Great. Okay, thanks. So we'll bring Maria in just a bit and connect this back to the international. But Willy, if you can stay with us, I think it'd be great to get some back and forth as well. And Maria, one of the reasons why we were excited to have you join us tonight is that you are really taking this from local to global. And, we've been in touch, and I know you pulled together a virtual event with gig worker organizations from around the world just a couple months ago. And so as we kind of think about, these fights, like the fight that Willy has just described here, can you just start by telling us about some of the groups that you've been in touch with in other countries that we might not have heard about? We had Yaseen on, and we've been talking a bit about the UK, but where else are we seeing gig worker organizations coming up and fighting these fights?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is, such an honor to be here in this program. And, I want to commend you for this work. In regards to the question of what other groups across the world are doing similar work, the first one that comes to mind is, because we're talking about delivery workers too, is the Foodora experience in Canada with the postal workers unions, which also included elements of new legal strategies, right? A third way category for workers, right? The dependent contractor. And despite all those mechanisms, sort of innovative, legal mechanisms, the company just decided to leave, right? So, it's really, it just shows you how difficult, this fight is, but the real, the best source of optimism for me and for everyone who is involved in organizing is the ability of workers to just self-organize, right? And that surge in organizing and activism that we've been seeing all over the world, I would say, right? Because we also hosted workers from Australia, from Africa, and Uber drivers from Africa, and they all engaged in the fight and decided to continue this fight, right? And so I think is we all realize it's hard, right? And it looks like a long winding road, right? That's what we saw with AB 5 and Proposition 22. But it's just a matter of keeping up the fight, right? And come up with responses, innovative responses to all the challenges that these platform companies are able to bring in front of us because they have so many resources, right? That, financial resources that we don't necessarily have, right, as workers. And so, but I think we have a lot in our favor in terms of the surge in activism, the surge in self-organizing, and also the history, the experience of unions, right? Like RWSU and others who are, coming up and supporting the workers in their self-organizing efforts.
Yeah, so I want to ask you to tell us a little more about what happened when you actually got people from different countries into the same virtual space. Now, I know you had groups from Mexico, groups from Argentina. You have to tell us some of the other countries. I think Netherlands. I can't remember where else. What happened when you actually had them in the same room? What they talk about?
Yeah, they immediately saw the connections, and immediately they had the desire to share, right? Share knowledge, strategies. How did you do it, right? Like, for instance, we had food delivery workers from Norway, right? And food delivery workers from Argentina and Mexico and New York, right? And of course, right there, like they were like, how did you do it? And we want to continue connecting with you, right? We want to learn more about your experience. And of course, what came up is like the question about, okay, what is your legal framework, right? How are the laws in your country? Because that's the other issue. We all start from different starting points, right? Because that depends on the legal framework, right, of the country in which we live. So it was very interesting. And, in Norway, for instance, and most of Europe, the food delivery workers are classified as employees. So it's like they don't have to wage that fight, right? It's a different starting point. They, of course, the companies have other type of strategies, anti-union strategies, right? And so it's like a different type of fight. But what is common, completely like common, is the ability of workers to come together, right? And and do the fight. So, like in the case of the food delivery workers, there are some elements that are common to all of them, right? Like the physical proximity, right? They all have to hang out in a place, in a public park, or a corner, a city corner. They all in front of a food chain restaurant, right? And they are all there talking union, right? So it's very interesting that is common to all the countries, right? But unfortunately, we don't start from the same legal, framework.
Yeah, although the other thing that we have in common is that we're all transnational companies at the end of the day, right? And whether they're taking advantage of workers in Norway or Mexico, it's coming back to the same capital holders.
That is true.
Well, and Maria, like, first of all, it's so great to have you here. I'm super excited that you're joining us. And, I wanted to ask, like, because it's so inspiring to hear any story of workers, sharing resources, showing solidarity, sharing strategies internationally. Like, that's the shit that gets me up in the morning, right? I mean, I think that's why we all do what we do, right? And I guess I wanted to ask, like, beyond workers in different countries kind of communicating and sharing, have there been discussions about how we can act internationally in concert? Because I think the thing that comes to mind, it was spring of 2019 where there was the global Uber like boycott. My dad told me that I think that my dad at that time, that was his first like strike that he had ever participated in. And it was really, he called me and he said, hey, I might head down to LAX. I hear a bunch of the drivers are down there, which was really cool because I was sending him links. I was like, look, drivers in India are doing this too. Drivers in Latin America are doing this too. So I guess I just wanted to kind of ask about that. Like, you know, even if we're playing on nationally idiosyncratic terrain, what possibilities might there be for us coordinating internationally?
Oh yeah, I think there are plenty of possibilities and opportunities, and I think Bama can also speak to that very well because she actually was instrumental in bringing together the rider workers, right? In the very first few international meetings, right, of that industry, of workers in that industry. So I think the same can happen with food delivery workers and also even with domestic workers. And there are initiatives. There are, incipient, activities, right? Organizing, at least bringing people together because these platforms are going everywhere, right? In every sector of the economy. And so I know of domestic workers in Europe connecting with South Asian domestic worker groups, right? And also in Latin America. And so, it all starts sometimes with a conference, right? An international conference and people get together or, the Solidarity Center of the AFL, running some kind of program, international program, and they all come together and there is a lot of hunger for that. So I see a lot of opportunities, and actually that is why also we try to invite more groups in food delivery and domestic work in the conference that we held in November, because we know that Bama already did this big conference, for rider workers. And so, I think, every time they get together, there is really like a spark, for continuing the collaboration and the sharing, right? And the coordination, hopefully, at one point, right? And we've seen it in ride share. I'm sure we will see it in other sectors as well.
Yeah. And just Willy, we'll have to talk about this after the live stream ends in 2 minutes. But Maria, what you were just saying reminded me of Willy's story, because Willy will tell you he didn't set out to be an organizer, but he made one phone call to another gig worker that really kind of started the process that turned him into an organizer. And how many phone calls did you end up making in 1 month, Willy?
Over 650 in 2 weeks, and we all connected and resonated with each other based on the same commonality and same story. These companies try to keep us apart, but our stories are too common, and it brings us together for sure.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Willy, I'm just curious, have you compared your story with stories from any delivery workers in other countries?
Yeah, I listen and I'm paying attention to all that, and I've heard things in Mexico, Africa, and everything seems to be identical to each other, and it's a bunch of shaking our heads yes all the time when we're having those conversations.
Let's keep those conversations going. And speaking of which, if you're watching right now, tune in every week for new Labor Radio Podcast Network live streams. We got to wrap up, but this has been so great. Bama, it's been an honor to co-host this with you. And please, everyone, go check out the Gig podcast, check out Working People, and check out the Labor Radio Podcast Network. Thank you to Willy. Thank you to Maria. Thank you to Yaseen. Thank you to Evan and Chris and everyone for putting this together. We'll see you guys next week.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1925. That was the day the first civil lawsuit for damages was filed on behalf of the Radium Girls. During the 1910s and 20s, radium was all the rage. It was considered a medical cure-all for everything from blindness to asthma. The U.S. Radium Corporation employed hundreds of young women in New Jersey and Illinois to paint radium onto watch dials and military instruments. Women workers were instructed to shape the paintbrushes to a fine point with their lips in order to paint the numbers onto the watch faces. They soon fell ill. Many complained of losing scores of teeth and shattered and rotting jaws. The death toll began to rise. U.S. Radium and other related companies initially tried to smear the women as suffering from syphilis. Catherine Wiley of the New Jersey Consumers League began investigating the use of radium by dial painters. She was also concerned about how emissions affected the community surrounding the plant. Wiley enlisted the help of Alice Hamilton, mother of industrial medicine and occupational toxicology. The chief medical examiner of Essex County determined the women suffered from radium exposure. They were exhaling radon gas. The findings were earth-shattering for the industry. Case proceedings were highly publicized in the press. Extremely frail and sick young women appeared in court, barely able to walk or testify. The company agreed to settle the case. $10,000 for each woman, a $400 a year pension, and medical care. Women at the Ottawa plant suffered for years before finally learning the truth about their job-related illnesses. The case impacted fields related to occupational safety and health. It also fundamentally broadened scientific understanding of radioactive elements. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You better listen, my brother, 'cause if you do, you can hear their voices still calling from across the years. And they're crying across the ocean, they're crying across the land, and they will until we all come to understand. None of us are free, none of us are free.